2 days. That is how long it took for the agreement that was supposed to end the war between the United States and Iran to hit its first major crisis. On Wednesday, American and Iranian officials digitally signed a memorandum of understanding designed to pause their conflict, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and begin a 60-day window of negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. It was presented as a historic breakthrough. By Friday morning, the first round of follow-up technical talks, scheduled to take place at a luxury resort in Switzerland, had collapsed entirely. We are going to break down exactly what happened, why Iran pulled back, what role the situation in Lebanon is playing in all of this, okay? And whether this entire deal is now at risk of falling apart before it ever truly began. Let us start with where these talks were actually supposed to happen, because the location itself tells you how seriously both sides were initially treating this process. The meeting was set to take place at the Burgenstock Resort, a luxury property overlooking Lake Lucerne in central Switzerland. This is not some generic government building, okay? It is owned by Qatar Hospitality, which is part of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. Qatar has played a significant mediating role in bringing the United States and Iran together throughout this entire process, alongside Pakistan, which also helped broker the original agreement. The plan was for American, Iranian, Qatari, and Pakistani officials to gather at this resort and begin working through the technical and highly sensitive details of the memorandum signed just days earlier. Instead, on Friday, the Swiss Foreign Ministry confirmed that these talks would not go ahead as scheduled. In a statement to international media, Swiss officials said simply that the planned talks between the US, Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan had been postponed, adding that Switzerland remained ready to facilitate these discussions whenever they could move forward. Now, let us get into why this actually happened, because the explanation reveals exactly how fragile this entire ceasefire framework really is, according to a US diplomat with direct knowledge of the situation. The talks were called off because Tehran is demanding a guarantee regarding the ongoing conflict in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah before it will move forward with any technical discussions on the broader US-Iran agreement. In simple terms, Iran is saying, we will not sit down to discuss the details of our own ceasefire with America, while Israel continues bombing our ally in Lebanon. This connects directly to violence that escalated dramatically in the hours before the talks were supposed to begin. Israeli strikes overnight into Friday killed at least 18 people in southern Lebanon, according to reports from the region. Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, reported intense fighting continuing on the ground. For Tehran, continuing to engage in detailed negotiations with Washington while watching Israeli operations intensify against its closest regional ally was apparently a bridge too far, at least for this particular round of talks. The American response to this collapse has been carefully worded, but reveals real frustration and uncertainty, as Vice President J.D. Vance, who leads the American negotiating team alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, spoke to reporters in the White House press briefing room on Thursday, just one day before the talks were supposed to happen. Vance stated that the trip to Switzerland had not actually been finalized in the first place, explaining that it had proven difficult to get Iranian officials physically out of Iran for the meeting. He told reporters he believed he would still travel to Switzerland at some point this weekend, suggesting the administration was trying to project that this was a delay rather than a collapse. However, a White House spokesperson's official statement painted a slightly different picture, stating plainly that the plans for the upcoming technical talks had not been finalized, and that logistics for these kinds of negotiations have never been simple or predictable. This is diplomatic language for acknowledging that something has clearly gone wrong, while trying to avoid declaring the entire process dead. Vance used his press conference for something else entirely as well. He directly criticized Israeli officials who had been publicly critical of both the Iran deal itself and of President Trump's handling of the negotiations. This is a remarkable moment. The Vice President of the United States standing in the White House briefing room, is pushing back against criticism coming from Israel. It's one of America's closest allies, because that criticism was complicating an agreement Washington had just signed with Iran. This tension reveals the core problem at the heart of this entire ceasefire framework. The deal was negotiated between the United States and Iran. Israel was never a party to it. And Israel has made clear, repeatedly, that it does not consider itself bound by terms it never agreed to. The Israeli military stated this week that it will continue operating in what it calls its security zone in southern Lebanon, and will continue working to remove threats beyond that zone as well, regardless of what Washington and Tehran have agreed to on paper. Let us talk about what is actually inside this memorandum of understanding, because understanding its contents helps explain why both the financial markets and regional governments are watching this situation so closely. The agreement, signed digitally on Wednesday, set in motion a 60-day window during which the United States and Iran are meant to negotiate final terms on the most sensitive issues separating them, chief among them Iran's nuclear program. Vance stated clearly on Thursday that this 60-day clock began ticking the moment the memorandum was signed, meaning Iran would only receive the rewards built into this deal if it actually complies with terms that still need to be worked out during this window. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told American lawmakers in a closed-door briefing that Tehran had agreed, as part of this framework, to invite United Nations nuclear watchdog inspectors back into the country. This would represent a significant step, given that international inspection access has been one of the most contentious issues in the broader nuclear standoff between Iran and the West for years. But critics of this memorandum, particularly within the United States Congress, have pointed directly at provisions involving sanctions relief for Iran. The agreement reportedly includes unfreezing previously frozen Iranian funds and establishing a $300 billion reconstruction fund to help rebuild infrastructure damaged during the recent conflict. For lawmakers skeptical of the deal, these financial provisions raise an uncomfortable question. Is the United States providing major economic relief to Iran before Tehran has actually demonstrated compliance with any of the nuclear restrictions the deal is supposed to require? There is also an important detail about how this memorandum was actually approved on the Iranian side that adds another layer of complexity. According to reports from this week, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khomeini, has personally approved the memorandum, despite what was described as his own reservations about its terms. He reportedly cautioned against what he viewed as overly demanding positions from the United States in the negotiations still to come. This tells us that even at the very top of Iran's government, this agreement was not universally embraced. It was approved cautiously, with warnings attached, rather than celebrated as an unambiguous victory. That context matters enormously when trying to understand why Iran pulled back from this first round of technical talks so quickly. If the supreme leader himself signed off on this deal while expressing reservations, it suggests that hardline elements within the Iranian government were always going to be looking for justification to slow down or pressure the process. The continued Israeli operations in Lebanon may have provided exactly that justification. There is some genuinely positive news buried within this otherwise tense situation. Despite the diplomatic collapse around the Switzerland talks, Israel and Hezbollah reportedly agreed to a ceasefire beginning at 4 p.m. local time on Friday. This suggests that even as the broader U.S.-Syria negotiating framework hits turbulence, there may still be efforts underway to calm the most immediate and deadly front of this entire regional conflict. The fighting in Lebanon itself. Financial markets responded to all of this with a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. News earlier in the week that the United States and Iran had reached an interim deal brought some initial calm to markets that had been on edge throughout this conflict. But the announcement on Friday that follow-up talks had been called off introduced fresh uncertainty, underscoring just how difficult It remains to convert a signed piece of paper into an actual, lasting peace settlement. So where does this leave the broader US-Iran agreement? Let us walk through what comes next. The most immediate question is whether the technical talks simply get rescheduled for a few days later, once the situation in Lebanon stabilizes somewhat, or whether this delay signals a deeper unwillingness from Iran to proceed on America's preferred timeline. Vance's comment that he expects to travel to Switzerland at some point this weekend suggests the administration is hoping for the former, a brief delay rather than a genuine breakdown. However, the underlying tension that caused this postponement has not actually been resolved. Iran wants guarantees regarding Lebanon before it will engage substantively on the nuclear and sanctions issues. Israel has shown no indication that it intends to halt its operations in southern Lebanon, simply because Washington, Tehran have signed an agreement that Israel was never part of till that fundamental disconnect gets addressed. Every future round of talks risks running into the exact same obstacle that derailed this one. There is also the 60-day clock to consider. That window began ticking the moment the memorandum was signed on Wednesday, according to Vance's own statement. Every day that passes without substantive, technical talks taking place is a day removed from that already tight timeline. Iran continues linking progress on the nuclear and sanctions track to developments in Lebanon. The entire 60-day framework could expire without the two sides ever reaching the kind of detailed final agreement this memorandum was designed to produce. For now, what we are left with is a ceasefire framework that exists on paper, a signing ceremony that already happened, and a follow-up process that has stumbled. Immediately out of the gate, Switzerland has said it remains ready to host these talks whenever both sides are prepared to proceed. The question is whether that moment arrives within days, or whether the broader situation in Lebanon continues to cast a shadow over every subsequent attempt at diplomacy between Washington and Tehran. This is precisely the kind of moment that determines whether a ceasefire becomes a genuine, lasting peace, or simply another temporary pause before the next escalation. The world will be watching closely over the coming days to see which path this conflict actually takes. Subscribe right now. I will be tracking every development in these negotiations as they unfold, including whether these technical talks get rescheduled and what happens next in Lebanon. Comment below. Do you think Iran is using Lebanon as genuine leverage? Or do you think this deal was always destined to run into trouble this quickly? Drop your thoughts below. See you in the next one.